But I want to welcome you tonight. And if this is your first time joining us live for a webinar, I want to say welcome. And this is a webinar series we've been doing for about 5 years. And we're providing monthly training for lay leaders in the church to help them get on mission and stay on mission, to equip leaders in the church for their area of ministry. That could be webinars that are related to elder leadership, or safety and security teams, prayer teams, mission committees and mission teams, um, outreach events or outreach plans, benevolence, and all different kinds. But the one that we're talking about tonight is about the 7 top finds of a secret shopper. And Waypoint staff get to go look at churches with the lens of a secret shopper multiple times a year. We're invited by a church with one of the services that we provide. We provide a whole portfolio of services trying to help churches thrive, help leaders get on mission and stay on mission. We've got a list of all the different kinds of resources that we provide for churches in that way, and kind of a map here of all the churches we've helped over the last decade in a substantive way with strategic services. And Secret Shopper is one of those kind of entry level, easy opportunities to help a church look at themselves through the lenses of someone who's visiting. And I was introduced to this idea. I was thinking about 30 years ago, I was serving in a church in Michigan, and had a family in our small group. Asked them what they did, and they said, well, we're secret shoppers. I'm like, what's that? And they had the contract, I believe it was Petco, or it could have been one of the other national pet chains, like Petco. I'm trying to remember what the other one was, but they would go all over the country and secret shop at that store, and then give a report to the administrative wing of the company about what they discovered. And so that's kind of the idea, is that we get to go visit a church on a Sunday morning and take some notes, and then present a report about what we saw, some observations, some things that we might suggest, and then some things that we really strongly recommend change, even though some of them may be free and some of them might be costly that you'd have to save for and budget for, and those kind of things. But I just did this in December 1st. I visited a church that will remain nameless because I may refer to them tonight, but delivered the report first week of January, right after the holidays, of a number of suggestions and recommendations they could do at their church. They've made some great strides over the last few years, and this was kind of a refresh of, okay, now that we're here, how can we go to the next level? So that's kind of the idea tonight. And so there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen that I would invite you, if you got a question as we go along about a particular one of these 7 areas, I want to invite you to go ahead and hit the Q&A button, ask the question as soon as you think of it, and it's in a queue over on the side of my screen, and we'll try and answer that live. And if we don't get to do that at that time or at the end, then we still have the opportunity to answer that question via email after the fact. And so please ask your questions as you have them. As always, we want to thank our ministry partner that sponsors our webinar platform, Mid-Atlantic Christian University, and they have provided the sponsorship of our platform since we began more than 5 years ago. We've got more than 100 training webinars on our YouTube channel that are organized in playlists in those different areas. So for elders, there's playlists for elders, prayer teams, mission teams, and so on. And so not only are we thankful that you're joining us tonight, but we'd love for you to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you get notified anytime one of our videos gets posted to our channel. But also, we'd love for you to forward those links to the people in your church that lead in those particular areas, so that they can feel supported and resourced to do their area of ministry really well. And so we have talked about this topic before. Oops, wrong one. There we go. Several years ago, about 3 years ago, there was a 55-minute webinar on the new realities for on-site first impressions. So this was coming out of COVID. How has the game changed coming out of COVID? And that was part of the conversation there. Of course, our next webinar next month, completely different topic. It's a new topic for us, really. First time we've covered this, which is how to raise up teenagers in your church for ministry. We're seeing a growing emphasis of raising up the next generation from within the church towards ministry. And so we're going to talk about what we're seeing churches doing to facilitate that. But tonight we're going to talk about the 7 fines of a secret shopper. And what we want to talk about tonight is having, number one, a team that thinks about first impressions. That whichever person is watching this webinar, either live tonight, we're glad that you're with us, or if you're watching on the YouTube channel after the fact, is there a group of people that focus on the presentation of your church? Because in a lot of churches, they have all kind of committees or teams, but there's not one that focuses on guest services or first impressions, or they're named different things, but it's not one person, but there's a group of people that this is what they're thinking about every week, every month, about the presentation they're making as people come to visit for the very first time. So we're going to talk about that tonight, and hopefully there's some meaningful principles that you can learn. But what we're talking about tonight is when I make a report of the things that I see as a secret shopper, there's more than 7 things typically. I'll probably talk about 25 or 30 things that I saw, some of them very small, some of them kind of big picture, and then talk about, so which ones need to be worked on first, which one needs to be saved for, which ones need to be delegated to a particular person in the church. And so there's kind of a checklist at the end about what's the next action step to actually move forward on some of these recommendations. And so the question is, do you have a team that is working on that? And so for your team, these are the top 7 that I would find that before I visit your church, I could almost write these in before I get there because they're there almost every time. And so these are the ones that I want to highlight tonight, is the ones that are on almost every report. There certainly are custom ones that this church, I'm going to recommend, hey, you need to look at this, or think about fixing that, or did you notice this? But no other church that has that happened before. But these are the ones that are probably the most common in the churches that we get to serve in this way. And so let's go to our first slide here. Back to our slides. And the first one, the first find is that you need to assess your outside or your external impression. All right. And there's 3 areas I want to talk about: your parking, your signage, and do you have external smiles? And so what we mean by this, number one is with your parking, is a couple of things. Number one, is there signage that makes it obvious how to get into your property from the road and where people are supposed to go to park? And that seems like, well, that's pretty obvious. But if you haven't looked with those lenses, for a person that's never been on your property before and they come for the very first time, is it obvious where they're supposed to park or where they're not supposed to park? The other thing I would say about your parking is, when's the last time you looked at the condition of your parking lot? It's making a first impression. And is it dirty? Are the lines so faded that you can barely see them anymore? We've got a good partnering church down in Southwest Virginia that has a gravel parking lot that extends their parking lot because they've grown so much. But they go and reline the gravel often because they want to make sure everybody understands this is where we park. And it's an attention to detail that says we care about what's going on here. Is there trash in the parking lot? Are the lines faded? And is it obvious where you're supposed to go, how the flow is supposed to go, those kind of things. So that's a first impression. It's interesting. There's an urban legend. I don't know where it came from, but back in the day when I first started going to seminars about first impressions, the going conversation was that studies were done that said guests make a decision whether they're going to return to your church within the first 7 minutes. And the debate was whether it was the first 7 minutes of your service or the first 7 minutes on your property. But I heard that it was the first 7 minutes on your property. So they pull in, walk in, come into your lobby, and in the first 7 minutes, they've already made a decision about whether they're going to return or not, long before the sermon is ever preached. And most preachers, they're focused on, I got my sermon right, which they need to. But for a team, it needs to be delegated, hey, from the parking lot to the door, to the lobby, to the kids area, to the bathrooms, to being seated in the auditorium, is it natural and easy for people to get there without having a problem doing so? And so that would be the first thing is are you making a positive first impression outside? The other thing I would say about that let's see if I've got this on my slide. Well, I talked about signage and parking. Um, the other thing I'd say about that is, are you creating a good first impression with sound? This last church that I went to, I intentionally went and arrived. If the church was at 10th service was at 10:30, I arrived at 10:29. So it wasn't like I arrived 10 minutes early and go chit chat with people in the lobby. This was for that person that arrives right at the last minute, gets out their car, goes to the lobby and sits down. What's their experience? And that the walk from the back of the parking lot, because all the front spots were taken, from the back of the parking lot, it was dead quiet. And so it was like once I had to open the door before I had any impression about the church that I was walking into. And so I would recommend to think about, can you pipe the music from your lobby, or upbeat Christian music from an exterior speaker out into your lobby, so that when people open their car door, they're getting a sense, and you get to choose what that music sounds like. It can be upbeat, it can be reflective and quiet, or whatever impression you're trying to make, but you can choose to make that first impression the moment they open their door and they hear the music that sets the tone for their visit to your church today. And so music would be one of those. But the big question is there anybody that's giving them a first smile before they walk into the door? And the reason we would say that is, if you can imagine going to a church for the first time, it's hard for us to identify with that, because if you're on this webinar tonight, you're probably a church leader, you've been in church a long time, and we have almost no recollection of the time that we went to church the first time, if ever. Many of us went to church like I did, probably week 1 or 2 of my life, and been there ever since. But for the person that has never gone to church, never gone to your church, it's been a long time since it's been to church, had a difficult time the last church they were at. You name the situation they're coming from, they're a little bit hesitant arriving on your property. The palms of their hands might be a little sweaty as they're pulling in, because they don't know people there. There's so many questions they would have about what they're going to experience today. And so if you can have someone outdoors that would be the first smile, that would break the ice with just a smiley face. It doesn't even have to be an extroverted person that's going to, talk to them or yuck it up with them or whatever, but someone that's going to look them in the eye. During COVID, I love this. One of the things that we saw many churches doing was people had little placards like, "Welcome, we're glad you're here." And even the most introverted person could go stand during COVID out in the parking lot and say, "We're glad you're here," and smile at people as they came in. And I thought that was a great innovation, not just for COVID, but from COVID, to be able to have a first smile in the parking lot. And you can have people on your team that are directing cars into the parking lot, but their job isn't really direct. People know how to park a car. Their job is to be smiling at people as they're helping people park the cars, so that they're creating this impression of, wow, there's some friendly people here that are happy to be here. And maybe I'm happy to be here as well. And so that's the first find that I find, being redundant. The first thing I find as a secret shopper is that churches have done a really good job over the last decade, really trying to figure out how to create a great first impression in the lobby and with their signage and other areas, but they haven't taken that one step further, or backwards actually, into the parking lot before people actually get into the building and say, "Hey, what does our impression look like from the street to the parking lot to the door?" And so that would be the first find that I would have for almost every church that I visit, is to say, "Hey, have you taken a good look at your exterior impressions?" So that's number one. If you got a question, go ahead and hit the Q&A button, and that we may be able to answer. But here's number two, is to assess your internal signage. And now the new terminology for this is your wayfinding. And that's kind of a trendy word, but actually I like it because it's a little bit more descriptive of you're helping people find their way. And so the first thing is, why do we need to do this? And people can figure out where the bathrooms are. They can figure out where the children's area is, or but the idea is psychologically, one of the greatest desires of people in public is not to look stupid. That they don't want to have to ask a question that shows that they don't know what's going on. And so if it's not clear in your lobby or in your hallways or in other areas of your church how you get to certain places, then they're going to have to ask somebody, So where's the children's area, or where do I go to get coffee? Where's the bathroom? If you had a cup of coffee before you left the house and you arrive at the church, and so now you want to go to the restroom before the service starts, is it really clear and obvious where that is? The other thing I'd say about your internal signage is a lot of the signage or decor on the walls is the stuff that you would buy at Hobby Lobby or your Christian bookstore back when we had those. And there's not some comprehensive plan about what those could look like. But to use your walls and your signage as an opportunity to cast vision about what your church is about is a great trend that we're seeing from a lot of churches. And so, as a secret shopper, we'll often say, have you considered using this wall to show your discipleship pathway at your church, or to use this wall to articulate your values, or be real strategic about that rather than having someone put up some nice Christian picture, but it doesn't have any strategy related to it. And so that would be to go into your lobby and your hallways with the eye for what does this look like for a visitor when they walk in? Does it help them find their way? The other thing I'd say about as a secret shopper is, have you looked at your signage just by how dated it is? Because a lot of the ways that you'll improve the overall impression of your church costs some money. But one of the simplest ways, though it'll cost some money, but one of the simplest, inexpensive ways is to change your signage to more modern placards, more modern fonts. A lot of the placards have been there for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and it looks like it. The placards on the bathroom doors that say men and women look like 1978. And so to rip those off and put ones that are from 2025 would almost instantly, in a very subtle way, but an instant way, make your church look a little bit younger and a little bit fresher. And so that's the second thing I would recommend for most churches that I would visit is, have you gone around your church and looked at the dating imagery around the churches? Are there things that look like they're straight out of the 1980s or the 1990s, or you pick the era, or worse, but pick the era, and is that the presentation we'd like to make? All right. So that's number two. Number three is it's very often that we will point out some very simple safety concerns. Now, and I have to be honest, Waypoint provides another service that we call our strategic facility evaluation, which is similar to uh, the secret shopper service that we provide, only it's not on Sunday morning, it's during the week. And we'll come in, walk around your building for a couple hours during the day, take a bunch of pictures, and then produce a fairly lengthy report on what we found about your facility as your most expensive ministry tool, and make some suggestions about the way you can do things with your facility to make them better presented, particularly with a view towards first-time guests. And so we get to do that several times a year as well. So they're interrelated, and both of them. So those services are gateways to other ways that we can help consult and help improve the presentation of your church. And so this would be similar. And so often this is a fairly lengthy part of the strategic facility evaluation, but in a secret shopper, we'll also notice some things. So number one, in the kitchen, uh, one of the things that we see is, do you have uh, unsecure chemicals and knives? And these are pictures actually from a strategic facility evaluation, but every week that I do this, I often see uh, chemicals and knives that a 3 or 4 year old unattended by their parents, when their parents are chatting after church for 10 or 15 minutes and the kids are running around, and the kitchen is right off the side of the auditorium, and who knows what they're getting into. And so that would be the first one I would say is, have you thought about the security about unattended kids? What can they get into? And it's not like you got to have a lock on everything in the building and have every door locked, but have you thought about, is there anything that, and I can tell a personal story. When I was a toddler, well, a little bit older than a toddler, probably 4 or 5 years old, but my parents were in choir rehearsal, either before or after Sunday night service. I don't remember which, but my cousin, who was 4 or 5 at the time, we were playing hide and seek down in the basement of our church. And for some reason, he decided to test how sharp one of the big knives in the kitchen was on his thumb. I won't name my cousin to protect the guilty, but he discovered it was very sharp, and then he walked all the way down the downstairs, up the stairs, up to the choir loft to his mom to show him the cut that he was bleeding all the way around and he was fine. Needed a couple stitches, but that makes me sensitive to every church that I go to look, are there unattended chemicals and sharp knives that some unattended kid could unwittingly get in trouble with. And so have you thought about that? And hopefully that is never the case, but it doesn't take a whole lot to put those at least high enough that they can't get into, or maybe a secure locker in the kitchen or something like that. So that's the first part of security that I would talk about. Another thing that I talk about with security, safety concerns, is it's become pretty much standard operating procedure to make sure you've got windows in all of your children's doors, that parents want to be able to look in the door and see their kids. And there's just enough bad stories out there, unfortunately, about things that have happened to kids at churches, that parents want to have confidence that they can see their kids and what's going on. And you can decide whether you want the reflective film to where you can see in, but the kids can't see out, or whatever you want to do. But I still go to churches where they have solid wood doors and you can't see what's going on in the kids' classrooms. And so hopefully your church is well beyond that. But I see that fairly regularly, that we don't do that. And then the last thing, the more modern thing would be to have cameras in the corners of the hallways, or in the lobby, or whatever, that is recording what's going on for safety concerns. And they are relatively inexpensive. You can get a 6-pack or an 8-pack. There's somebody in your church that has the technical ability to install those. And then there'll be a monitor that shows all of those. And a lot of the churches I go to, um, I see that they've got that monitor somewhere. Usually it's somewhere near the children's station, but they've got the monitor faced towards the person that's checking the kids in, or kind of faced away from people. But the church that I led until I became the executive director, I wanted that monitor to the side to where the person could see it, but people checking their kids, I wanted them to be confident that we had security going on at our church. And so I wanted them to see that we had what's going on there, the beginning and the end of the lobby, the entrance to the bathrooms, the entrance to every kid's area, the entrance to the front door, the entrance to the back door. We had a recording of what was going on, just in case anything would ever happen, that we would have that available to us. And that's going to cost some money, but you would be surprised if you've got a membership to Costco, that in December of every year, they're going to go on sale the last week of December or sometime, where you can buy the hardware for that to be installed at your church and have that security. We have another webinar that we did in the past. We've got several webinars actually about children's safety and security, but one of them is how do you protect yourself against anything happening to your kids from the outside. And the fellow that gave that presentation for us is an old friend of mine who now works for a church children's safety security company. And basically he said, you don't have to be the best church in the world. You just have to be better than all the churches around you, because the people that would ever do something at your church typically will case several churches, and they will do something. We had a case about 3 years ago of a little boy in Southwest Virginia that was taken from a church, and the family had looked at 3 churches and picked the one that was the easiest one to do something at. And he said, all you got to do is not be the worst, so have windows in your doors, have cameras stationed strategically in your church, that would say to anybody that would want to do something, we take security and safety seriously here. And so that would be something that I see as I walk into a church, as I'm looking around, seeing if I see any of those. Pretty simple. They're not very, uh, conspicuous. They're pretty simple, but you can tell that they're keeping track of what's going on around the property. So again, if you got any questions, go ahead and hit the Q&A button. But I want to go on to, is that the end of that one? Cameras, windows in the doors, and in the kitchen. So that's number 3, is do you have any safety concerns, real simple ones that need to be taken care of almost immediately? All right. Now we're going to transition to, now we're in the auditorium, and we've gone from the parking lot into the lobby. Maybe we've checked our kids in, we've gone to the bathroom, and now we're in the auditorium. And it's probably no surprise to anyone in the room that's on the webinar tonight or watching on YouTube that we would talk about worship slides, both the production and the advancing of them. Because famously, churches get this wrong every week, and they struggle with this. And there's multiple reasons for that. We also got another webinar you can find on our YouTube channel. Actually, I've got the images of this, but one is a 55-minute one on how do you make the slides well, and then there's the art of advancing slides, and we've got that cut into a 5-minute clip that you can also share with the people at your church that are advancing the slides that show them what I was taught at a very large church. If you're going to advance slides at this church, here's how you do it. And so that's been cut into a 5-minute clip from the greater webinar that was 55 minutes on all about the projection of your slides. And so I'd advise you to watch that, or the person at your church who that is their role, is to produce the slides. But practically every church that I go to, there's quite a bit of observations and suggestions about the presentation of the slides. And so the few things that I would say about that is learn the art of advancing the slides. The general idea, and you can watch the 5-minute version, but the 5-second version is I want to be able to read the whole first line of the next slide before I articulate the first syllable of the first word. So I need to be able to read the first line and then land on the first word at the right time with the lyrics. And so I've got a lot of other, and I'm an old worship guy from back in the day. I was a worship minister at a church, and so I've got a lot of pet peeves about that. But how do you get the standard? The question is really not what the art is how do you create a standard that everybody that would advance the slides know at this church, this is the way we do it. And that's the bigger question is, can you define your standard and then try and teach and uphold your standard over time? The other thing I'd say is, are your slides, is there somebody that has eyes on your slides before Sunday morning? There are almost every Sunday morning, there'll be a slide where there's a spelling mistake or the word is a homonym where it's the wrong word. It's spelled, this word's not misspelled, but it's the wrong word or something like that. It's like, that's got to be seen by somebody. And there's somebody in your church that would love to see that email on Friday afternoon or Saturday morning. Hey, can you put the last eyes on our slides? And there is a grammarian in your church that would love to have the opportunity to make sure your slides are clean every week. And so you can watch that webinar if you'd like about some of the principles about what they would be looking for. As a worship guy, one of the things is I want the lines of my slides to match the phrasing of the lyrics. That sometimes the words, there's 3 or 4 words that are actually on the next line, but they're on the last line here. And so if I don't know the song very well, the hard return of the lines themselves aren't helping me sing the song. And my goal is to not interrupt worship. My goal when I advance the slides is that I'm not trying to read the next line while it's already being sung. And I'm trying not to confuse people because of the repeats or whatever happens. Is I just want a steady flow of worship, uninterrupted worship. And so how can we do that? And so probably no surprise, but the question is how can you create a standard that's upheld rather than just always go, yeah, they're slow every week or they're behind every week or whatever, and everybody kind of winks and says, yeah, that's the way it is there are churches that get it right. And it usually takes a couple of people that say, okay, we've got to set a standard and figure out how we're going to teach and uphold that standard. And then they can get it right. All right. That is number 4. So let's go ahead and talk about find number 5. And that would be clear and then early communion instructions. And so let's talk about that a little bit, because this is almost every week. Everybody at your church knows how you take communion except your visitors. And again, if their palms are sweaty when they're driving onto the property because they've never been there before, it happens again as soon as you start talking about communion, because they're like, oh boy, I don't know how they take communion here. Are we going to take it together? Are we going to hold it and take it privately? How does that work? And so to give clear instructions on at our church, this is in just a minute, we're going to be taking communion. And I would advise to give the instructions early and then go to the meditation or the thought about what communion is. And the reason for that is because they're not going to hear what you're talking about communion, because in their mind, there's this conversation going on about how do they take communion here. And you have to remember the people that are visiting your church likely came from a different church background, whether it was Baptist, Lutheran, Methodist, Catholic, Assembly of God, whatever their church background is, it's very likely they took communion in a different way than you do every week. It might be by intinction, where you rip it off and dunk it in the juice. It might be all hold it and all take it together. Or you can imagine all the different ways churches take communion. They don't know which way you do it at your church, and so they're stressed out about that. I have to admit, I'm stressed out about that, and I've been part of Christian churches my whole life. But I go to a new church, and I'm like, oh, how are they going to do it here? And my worship, thinking about the elements of communion and what they represent, are completely interrupted when I'm wondering and looking around, trying to watch the first person before I take it. And so it kind of ruins the moment when I don't know how it's going to happen. And so if you can say that before you get into your thoughts about communion, I think that's really helpful. And most people, almost every church, even if they give instructions, they'll talk about communion, then give instructions at the end. And for your visitor, they're stressed out about that. Even more than that, I would say, is to have an instruction slide. And I give this recommendation to almost every church that I visit in Secret Shopper that says, hey, at our church, this is the way we take communion. And so that way, and leave it up while the person is talking about communion, whether it's the preacher after his message or it's an elder that gives a meditation, doesn't matter. But as they're talking about communion, put the instruction slides up there. And most of your slide people are not going to want to put that up there because they think it's kind of rude that putting that up there while the person's talking. But I think it's just the opposite, that it's helpful because your regular people aren't going to read that slide. They've been there every week, so they're going to ignore that slide. But the person that is not from your church, they can read that slide while the guy's talking. They can, multitask. They can read that and then listen to the conversation. And so, even as a senior minister in a church that tried to get this right, I wouldn't say argue, but I had to work with my slide people to say, I want that slide up even sooner. Put that slide up even as soon as we even hint at that we're moving towards communion. I want the instruction slide up. And it feels out of place at first, like it's interrupting the thought, but in my opinion, it's the opposite. It actually helps people move towards, okay, I know how they're going to take it, so now let me think about communion. So you can tell that's a pet peeve of mine, but I think it's really helpful because your regular people aren't going to care about that slide anyway. The other thing I'd suggest about that is to have a bin of images, same text, but different backgrounds that rotate. Maybe you have one for a month and then 3 different months and they rotate. Per quarter you've got 3 images, or are they different every week for 4 weeks? Just so that they look different, and it's not the exact same slide every single week. But you can leave them up. Maybe it's the sermon series that you're in has a background kind of imagery to it, and it can be superimposed on that. So to have a little bit of variety, but at the same time, get it up early and clear. And there are some churches that talk a lot about communion, but they don't say, so in a minute, there's people going to pass these out. And one thing that I'm all curious about every week is, then what do I do with the empty ones? Am I going to throw it in the bin on the way back out? Are they going to pass the little basket that I'm going to throw it in? And I'm worried about, do I put the little cup on the chair and then it's going to tip over and one little drop is going to get on the seat? Tell me what I'm supposed to do with the empty cup afterwards as well. All right. So that's one of the finds of a secret shopper, is to give clear, early instructions on what's going to be happening during the communion time. All right. Related to that, now, number 6 is to give clear next steps for making faith decisions. And this one I really struggle with on most churches I visit. And what I mean by that is, you get down to that point of the service where you say, so if you fit into this category here, then the way you can make a faith to become a member of our church, or to talk to someone about what it means to become a Christ follower, or to talk to someone about what it means to get immersed or whatever, you have to, number one, be clear, which class of person are you talking to? And for that kind of person, what do they do? Where do they go? Who do they talk to? And to be very clear about that. And you can't say talk to Sally, because they don't know who Sally is. All right. So you have to say, you go here, and one of our leaders from our church will be there to talk to you. And I want to address this. Number one is the whole idea of the walk down the aisle invitation, which, growing up in the Christian Church and Church of Christ, it was the standard. In every service you went to, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, there was an invitation at the end of the service for anyone that would want to make a faith decision to come forward uh, to the front, meet the preacher, and that was kind of required for your worship service, or it didn't count. And we can talk about the humorous side of that. But it's interesting if you that now there's a lot of churches that may be providing that as an option, but it's not the only option that a person can make a faith decision. And there are churches that I go to that if I can tell that if I went there several weeks, that the only way that I can make a faith decision is to walk up front in front of all these people that I don't know, to the preacher that I don't know very well yet, and make a faith decision. And then I think that's a great hurdle, an unnecessary hurdle. And in the history of the church, the walk down the aisle invitation is a relatively new invention or a new tactic. Um, it was actually in the American scene. It surfaced in the late 1800s with the teaching and influence of the great preacher and evangelist from the Second Great Awakening, Charles Finney. If you know church history, you'll recognize the name Charles Finney, one of the great leaders of the Second Great Awakening. And so then by the early 1900s, it had become standard in most evangelical churches to provide the walk down the aisle invitation. Usually it originated originally in like the camp meeting revivals, the tent revivals on Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night, and that's when you would walk down the aisle, and it gave standard by which, like Billy Graham and his crusades, would have people walk down the aisle in big stadiums, come all the way forward down to the stage. But that was started, basically it became the standard 100 years ago. I have a 2,000-year history of the church. That's a relatively young invention for the way people would respond to make faith decisions. And all of a sudden, in my childhood, it was the only way you could make a faith decision, or the only way articulated that you could make a faith decision. And so now a lot of our churches, particularly led by our new churches, will explain to people, if you need to make a faith decision, and particularly if you need to make this decision, then this is what you do. If you need to make this decision, then this is what you do. And a lot of the churches, believe it or not, out there are not giving walk down the aisle invitations as one of the options. And they're still having lots of faith decisions made every year because there's clear instructions on where you go and who you talk to, or the kind of person you're going to talk to. Is you're going to talk to the preacher? Are you going to talk to one of our elders? Are you going to talk to one of the great people at our church? Um, and and so I like having an option of, hey, there's going to be one of the leaders at our church that you can talk to, because they're like not a paid clergy. They're kind of like a real person that I can go talk to. And they're going to be over, off to the left side of the lobby, or at the information table, or in the back of the auditorium, right over in this corner. And I also like to say, in your clear descriptions, if you want to talk to someone about, rather than if you want to make this decision, because I think that takes the pressure off of, I've got to be all the way ready before I go talk to someone. And it's nuanced, but I think it's important. There's a lot of churches where I'll go and they'll say, if you want to get baptized, then you need to talk to so and so. It's like, well, I don't know if I want to get baptized. I want to talk to someone about what it means to get baptized. And if you've been around, you know that different churches teach different things about what it means to be baptized and why you get baptized. And so I'd like someone to check a box on their Connect card, or to check a box on the app that we've asked them to open with the scriptures for the sermon earlier in the service, or to go to a particular area to talk to someone about what it means to get baptized, or what it means to become a member of our church. I don't want to say, if you want to become a member of our church, you need to go here. I want to say, if you want to talk to someone about what it means to be a member of our church, then you're going to go to the information table in the lobby. And so it creates a broader pool of people that you can talk to. And so those are some of the suggestions that I see, because in almost every church, as a secret shopper, I think it is not clear exactly what I'm supposed to do if I'm ready. Number one, if I'm ready to make a faith decision, but number two, if I want to talk to someone about that. And to be honest, as a preacher, and if there's other preachers watching, or any believer that's watching this knows that there have been times people walk down the aisle for a walk down the aisle invitation and say, I'm ready to get baptized. And we really don't know who they are, and we have no idea what they believe about baptism and what it means. But that's been the only option we've given them, is to walk down and say, I'm ready. And that just doesn't feel right at times. And so to give them other options, to have conversations with good people in your church about what it means to make those decisions, I think you'll actually have more decisions than just giving the walk down the aisle invitation option only. And so that's consistent with almost every church. All right, last find that we would see in almost every church is, am I going to have any real conversations with real people? And here's what I mean by that is there have been great teachings and trainings for first impressions. It's one of the services that Waypoint provides is we'll come and do a Saturday morning training, 3 hours with a whole team of people from your church, not just 2 or 3 people, but hopefully 20 or 30 people that are all in the different areas of first impressions from the lobby to and the parking lot, the children's area, check-in, information table, uh, guest services, coffee, in the auditorium. There's all these people that need to have the lenses on about your guests to do that training. But I can tell you there are churches that I visit that have all of that going on. They do it like a machine, but it still feels cold. There, we recommend someone standing with their back to the door, the open door, so that people come by them. That you're figuratively and literally saying, "Welcome in. Our door is open for you today." And there's churches that do all the different steps, but I still visit and leave and never have a real conversation with a real person the whole morning. Even though there's plenty of people that say, "Hey, how you doing? Hey, glad you're here." Hey, there's 6 or 8 people that wave at me and smile and say hello. But I think the odds of a visitor coming back are completely uh, contingent on did they have a conversation with a real person that day. So how do you do that? Because a lot of the introverts in the world are like, oh gosh, now I got to go make chit chat with people, and and there are some people that you can deputize to do that. A couple of ways, and this is in some of our training, is to have zone greeters, which are people that sit in the same part of your auditorium every Sunday. They're not in the greeting team, kind of the people, like Walmart. There's people that stand there at Walmart and say, "Hey, good morning, glad you're here." Well, it's like they're getting paid to say that. But then there's a zone greeters that 3 or 4 of them that sit in the same area of your church, and you deputize them. Hey, if you see anybody new, you kind of know everybody at our church. If you see anybody new sit down in your area, would you go introduce yourself to them? And they're like, sure, I'd love to do that. We had a fellow at our church that I last led in Richmond, and he just recently passed away. Great leader, great Christ follower, teacher of the Bible, Tiny Richmond. Tiny was about 6'7", 300 plus pounds. So he was tiny, but he sat down over here on my left every Sunday, brought in his giant Starbucks or Big Gulp. And he sat down there, and I went to Tiny and said, Tiny, if you see anybody new in your area, would you say hello to him? He's like, sure, happy to. And so it's coaching and equipping people to have real conversations rather than just those perfunctory ones of the people that are supposed to say hello because you can tell they've been assigned to a particular area of your church. The best example I can give of this as a positive example, most churches obviously think that they're friendly, but we all know they're friendly to themselves, is how do you teach and equip people to do that? You got to find people, but you can talk about it from stage. And I was at a church recently, not a new church. It's actually the oldest Christian church in America. They're celebrating their 250th birthday this fall, Cool Spring Christian Church, out in Lunenburg County, Virginia. So they're older than America, 1775, and doing a great job. It's actually Tiny Richmond's son, Dave Richmond, that's the preacher there. And I visited there very recently. And after the church service was over, it's country church, but pretty full. And there were some of these areas that they didn't have. If we did first impressions training and said, here's the 10, 12 areas you need to cover, they did not have all of them, probably maybe half of them. But as the church service concluded, I was seated over on the right in the middle. I got up and put my back to the side wall and just watched what was going on. And sitting right behind me to my left, there was a couple, middle-aged, looked like early empty nesters, maybe, that were visiting this country church for the first time. And you could just kind of tell that they were not from there. And so I'm standing with my back up against the wall after church, and the gal that was seated behind them, a little bit younger, uh, tapped them on the shoulder right after church and said, "Hello, my name is so and so. We're so glad you're here." And she said, "I am a teacher at such and such elementary school. My husband works at the fire department. We've been a member of this church for this long. When we first came to the church, this is why we came. But now that we've been here, here's what we love about this church. And then she asked them their name. And and is this your first time here? And I love that for a number of reasons. Like somebody trained her how to do that, or if not, I wish I'd filmed that. Because number one, they didn't ask immediately, "Are you first time visitors here?" Uh, and uh, and so tell us about yourself. Because a first time visitor, they may not be wanting to know all that. But she introduced herself, told her gave her name first, told where they work in town and how long they've been coming to the church, why they loved it. And man, she just set that up and then they said, yeah, actually, we're from a different state, but our grandkids live up this way. So we're trying to find a church that would be closer if we moved up this way. She's like, oh, we got a great, there was a natural conversation that happened as a result. And I thought, man, this church didn't have all 12 of the first impressions stations all covered perfectly. But the odds of that couple coming back after that little 5-minute conversation with this gal named Debbie or whoever it was just perfect. And can you deputize people, whether it's in the auditorium or in the lobby, um, to be able to be on the lookout for visitors? Unless you're at a large church, you know who the visitors are. And even if you're at a mid-sized, mid to large church, you can still tell who the visitors are just by the look in their eye. When they're coming in the door, you can still go over to them. Hey, we're so glad you're here. My name's so and so. One thing I will say on the last slide here is the one way that I trained. I learned this at a seminar at somewhere, but I taught multiple people at my church to ask this question: what brought you to our church today? Fill the name of your church. What brought you to First Christian today, or what brought you to Life Point today, or whatever. And so all of our elders and their wives, first impressions people, anybody in the lobby, our guest services, they would know to ask the question, what brought you to our church today, as their opening question, rather than are you new here? Because if you ask someone if they're new here, it's almost a lose-lose. Because if it's no, then you're pointing out that they don't belong here because they're new. And if they say yes, I'm new here, then you've exposed the fact that they're brand new. And if they aren't new, then you're embarrassed that you don't know that they've been here before. And so it's kind of like a lose-lose question. But if you say, hey, what brought you to our church? A lot of times you'll get a snarky answer like my car, brought me to church or whatever, or my husband or my wife brought me to church or whatever. But it creates an opportunity. Number one, I would say about 1 out of 4 people that get asked that will actually give an insight as to why they visited your church. And that insight might be, well, my wife and I just got a divorce, and I really can't go to what used to be our church anymore, so I'm looking for a new church to belong to. Man, that's a powerful statement. And you get an opportunity to speak into that a little bit. Or it's like, hey, we're new in town. We're looking for a church that our kids would like. And it's like, oh, well, let me go introduce you to our children's minister over here. And so if you ask that question, not are you new here, but what brought you to our church here today? And you can get all kind of answers. And then you can go introduce them to a person that can have a real conversation that kind of meets where they're at. If there is any. Sometimes there isn't any, and you're so, oh, well, we're so glad you're here. But we would train people to ask that question. And so that's the end of our my 7 top finds that I see at almost every church, is that most churches have some kind of first impressions, but I don't have a real conversation with anyone. And of course, I'm trying to disguise the fact that I'm from Waypoint, and so, oh, I'm just visiting from out of town today. And then they'll say, oh yeah, and sometimes I find someone to ask great questions, and I've got to say, well, actually, I'm here because the preacher asked me to come take a look at what visitors see from your church. And they're like, oh, that's awesome. I'm so glad you're here. But to have those lenses on. So that is the 7 things. And as we're going through these, there's probably 4 or 5 or 6 of them that your church is pretty good at. But my question would be, what's the 1 or 2 that you go, you know what, we can do better at that? Is there a person or a team at your church that you can say, hey, let's get better about our slides and how they are advanced, or how we do faith decisions, so in the worship service or in your lobby or in your parking lot, which is it that could do work? And what I want to say is that Waypoint, if you're in our region, We exist to help churches get on mission and stay on mission because we love the church, the bride of Christ. We love lost people, the object of the Great Commission, and we love our family of churches, the Restoration Movement. And so, if we can come alongside of you for a very modest fee, we just ask you to pay our expenses for the day, to come in, take notes, prepare a report, and then deliver that report, walk through it with the right leaders so that you can actually have a plan to how you're going to improve on the ones that you can. We would love to serve your church that way because that's really what we do is we serve you in your church. So we're glad that you've been a part of our webinar tonight. I do want to highlight those webinars that are coming up again next month. Is the one about how do you raise up teenagers in your church towards ministry. And then I also want to invite you to check out the Waypoint podcast. We've got more than 10,000 downloads of the podcast that we've been happening for 4 years now. And also invite you to check out all the other events that are on the Waypoint website that we have coming up this spring. The Art of the Sermon comes up in March, among other things. And so we're glad that you're partners with Waypoint. And we hope that you would like and subscribe our YouTube channel so that you can be equipped and feel resourced for doing your area of ministry well. So we're glad that you came tonight. We hope that we see you next month, and invite the right people in your church to attend that session as well as others in our church. Have a good night.